Okay, so let's move on and talk about a negative feedback system. Now, remember I told you negative feedback systems are usually uh, good things because they bring us back to a set point. Now, I'm going to give you a very, anatomical example here with handout 1B. So if we look at handout 1B, this is an example of a negative feedback. All right. So here is handout 1B. And the first thing I need to do is kind of explain what is going on in this handout. And this looks a little bit weird. I'm going to cover up a few things until I want you to see them. But there is a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is known as the center of homeostasis. So if you look here, I've got this picture of a brain. The center part of our brain is zoomed in, and it's made up of this area called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus has something that you may be familiar with connected to it called the pituitary gland. But the hypothalamus is the center of homeostasis. It is the control center that controls much of our homeostatic balances. And I'm giving you three examples here in blue. The first example is that the hypothalamus is going to be what we call a thermoregulator center. It's going to keep us at 98.6 degrees. So if we get too hot, the hypothalamus tells the body to sweat. If we get too cold, the hypothalamus sends signals to tell the body to shiver. So it's the command center of homeostasis. Now, there are a couple more examples here. The hypothalamus also regulates our blood sugar. And it turns out that we need approximately 100 milligrams per deciliter of glucose, sugar, to blood in our bloodstream. And so if we get below 100 milligrams per deciliter, the hypothalamus detects that and sends signals to make us hungry, so we go in search for food to raise our blood sugar. If our blood sugar is too high, the hypothalamus can send signals to ship that blood sugar to our cells and get rid of it out of the bloodstream. Another example is that the hypothalamus also is what we call an osmoregulator center. And as an osmoregulator center, it's going to control how much water to solutes we have in our blood. So, for example, how much water to salt ratio we have. That's called the osmoregulator center. And it turns out that the balance, the set point, is around 300 molar per osmolar of solutes or salt to water in our blood. Now, I'm not going to ask you this on any quiz or exam. I'm not going to ask you these specific numbers, but you just need to know that these are the set points, like 98.6 degrees. We want to be hovering around these numbers for the amount of blood sugar we have and the amount of water to salt ratio. So if we get more, if we lose this number and get below it, it invokes what we call the thirst reflex, where we get thirsty, we drink water to raise our water levels back to this number. Now, for my example of a negative feedback system, we're going to be talking about this osmoregulator center, this thirst center. So what happens when we are dehydrated? All right. Well, when we are dehydrated, our body is what we call hypertonic. So we've got less water than salt. So this set point number is off. What happens is when we are hypertonic, our kidneys send a signal to our hypothalamus. And then the hypothalamus is then going to generate a signal that goes to our pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is made up of two parts. It has an anterior or front section and a posterior back section. The posterior pituitary gland is going to create a hormone in response to our body being hypertonic, having low water. This hormone is called antidiuretic hormone. And antidiuretic hormone is going to be signaled by the hypothalamus to be released by the posterior pituitary. It's going to flow out into the bloodstream, and it's going to flow down to our kidneys. All right. And it's going to signal the kidneys. I'm going to raise this up a little bit. It's going to signal the kidneys to retain water so that we don't dump water into our urine. So in other words, the water that would normally go out in our urine is kept in our bloodstream. That raises our water to salt ratio in the blood and brings us back closer to this number. So this is a negative feedback system because antidiuretic hormone is telling the kidneys to retain water, which brings us closer to the set point of 300 molar per osmolar of solute to water in our blood. All right. Now, when that occurs, I got to raise this up a little bit more, but when that occurs, the water levels in our blood rise. All right. And that's going to bring our body back to a balance that we call isotonic. So this balance makes us more isotonic, which means we are closer to the balance. Iso means the same, right? And as our body gets more isotonic, which is where we want it, this is going to send a signal back up to our brain and tell our brain to turn off the production of antidiuretic hormone. So we're going to make antidiuretic hormone until we don't need it anymore. And then once we are isotonic again, we're going to send a signal back to the hypothalamus to turn off the production of antidiuretic hormone. And this is a negative feedback. It's bringing us back to homeostasis. Now, what's interesting is the kidneys themselves, and I have this written in purple, the kidneys themselves are going to sense if the body is hypertonic or dehydrated. And it's the kidneys that send a signal to our hypothalamus that then causes the release of antidiuretic hormone, which goes back to the kidneys to tell the kidneys to retain water. So you can see how this is kind of a crazy system here. In a perfect world, you would think the kidney would just realize that our body's hypertonic and then signal itself to hold water, but that's not what happens. What happens is we have to send the signal to our brain. Our brain then releases antidiuretic hormone, which then tells the kidneys to retain water, and we go back to this balance. All right, so handout 1B is just simply an example of this negative feedback system. Sorry, I can't get the whole thing in my doc cam to show you the whole picture, but you know what's good is anytime we're doing this online, you can always just freeze the video and write it out. So I hope this kind of clears up what a negative feedback system is. And what we're going to do next is talk about a good positive feedback system for Handout 1C. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you in the next video.